welcome to AGN Media's Green, White, Checkered. As always, I'm your host, Kerry Varnado, and with me, as always, are my colleagues Jacob Mayer and Terrence Hundley. Let's get right to it with Garage Talk. All right, Terrence, that moment we were waiting on through the entire chase was here. Someone slipped. Who was it? What happened?
Matt Kenseth, but it wasn't necessarily a slip. It was just a flat-out miss. All season, they've been one of the most consistent teams out there week in and week out, with maybe an occasional mechanical failure here or something happened there. But this was a point wherever he got to a point where he just couldn't drive the car. It was that loose. It was that tough for him. It didn't help them when they finally did get into the top 10. They have that pit stop wherever they couldn't decide if they're going 2 tires, 4 tires, and then they get the hose caught underneath it, and it's a 25-second green flag stop, and that was the end of that.
And it makes me wonder, you think the pressure got to him this week?
I don't know what else you can say, because that's basically a pit crew that's been nearly flawless all year, and then to throw out to where they couldn't decide if they're even going to go 2 or 4 tires, and the crew member sitting there with the tire gun just in front of the car can't decide which way he's going. I mean, something had to happen.
Yeah, it was interesting because even at one point in the race, the car was so bad, and Kenseth is like, I can't drive the car, and his crew chief says there's really not much I can do about it. At that point, and that was about midway through the race, they were pretty well sunk, and it's going to be tough now. But if there was, this is where Johnson is so good, because he's good at all these different tracks in the chase, and historically Matt Kenseth has not been good at Phoenix. He was better in the Gibbs car back in March, but he's never been fantastic on these flat, shorter tracks, and so I think that he had that disadvantage working for him as well.
The only one where I guess you could say Jimmy might have a disadvantage is on road courses, which goes back to me wanting one in the chase. But at the same time, Kenseth really didn't have a weakness all year. There were even at the short flight tracks, he was running top 5s, top 10s. So it was just really rare to see a team of that caliber slip up, and they're probably going to be coming to Homestead pretty angry.
Yeah, we kind of saw this happen back in 2009 when it was Kenseth and Johnson. They get to Phoenix, and Kenseth just doesn't have a car he can compete with, and we saw how that one turned out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. Well, fellas, as the chase wraps up, Jake, we might also see a career wrap up, or might have seen a career wrap up for one of NASCAR's most famed drivers. That'd be too overstating the case.
I think he's got a shot at the Hall of Fame. Bobby Labonte was in his final race in the 47 car, and at this point, a driver who hasn't won in 10 years now has kind of been struggling with some single car teams the past several years. AJ Allmendinger is going to be in that car at Homestead, and so this might be the end of the line for Labonte's most likely his full-time Cup career. He might get a part-time job with some small team, but this is kind of signaling the end of an era, because Jeff Burton doesn't. I mean, he says he's got something in the works, but probably also not a full-time ride. Mark Martin said he's not going to race next year. So I think we're seeing one of those shifts in the sport right now.
Yeah, just remember whenever it was, like basically every week, Bobby Labonte, Jeff Burton, Mark Martin up front each and every week, and now it's gone to a point where they may not even have full-time rides next year. It's just that it brings into perspective the longevity of how Bobby's lasted so long, and these guys have, and then even throw into account Jeff Gordon, who was also strong during that time, to still be in a competitive ride at this stage in his career. It's just, I guess it's going to kind of be sad to see whenever some of these guys that I grew up watching aren't going to be racing anymore.
Yeah, kind of like what we saw at the beginning of the 2000s when you had Dale Earnhardt, Rusty Wallace, Sterling Marlin, Terry Labonte. That group all kind of phased out at the same time. I think we're seeing another shift like that.
The young guns that came in to replace them, who are now today's veterans.
And if you look in the truck series right now, it is loaded with young talent. I mean, we had another 17-year-old win this last week. Darrell Wallace Jr. wins 2 weeks ago at Martinsville. So I think we're really starting to see a groundswell of these young drivers coming up.
And back on that other note, when you were mentioning Rusty Wallace, I still remember the retirement tour where it was Rusty alongside Mark Martin.
That's true.
But Mark Martin's still out there.
Yeah, what was that, 2005?
Something like that, yeah. All right. We'll look ahead to shift from memories to Homestead when we come back. And welcome back. It's time for Pace Laps, brought to you by Route 66 Motor Speedway. All right, Terrence, at this point, it's pretty well over, is it not?
I wouldn't even say pretty well. I mean, I'm at the point where I'm saying it's over. And not just for the fact that he's 28 points out, but for the fact...
He being Jimmy Johnson.
He being Matt Kenseth is 28 points out behind Jimmy Johnson. But from the fact that the last time Hendrick Motorsports had a test at a speedway, it was Texas Motor Speedway, and they finished, I think, first, second, and fifth. And Jeff Gordon was strong there before he had tire issues. And they also tested at Homestead. So I'm expecting the Hendrick boys to be strong once again, and I don't see how Matt Kenseth can make up that much ground without something even happening. He'd still even have to lead the most laps, finish first, and Jimmy would have to finish, I think, 30th, 31st? Maybe even a bit further back than that. So even if he has a problem with all the go-or-go homers and the starting parks we've got back there, if you make it halfway through the race, you're basically guaranteed a top 30.
Yeah, and I see it tough. I mean, it's going to be tough for Kenseth to go up there and dominate a race, because that's pretty well what he's got to do. He's got to go.
As you pointed out, he is coming in hungry.
He is, but their struggles last week that I think is going to be tough to overcome. Momentum, you don't think about auto racing being a sport that has momentum, but it does. And with their struggles, which I think the pressure got to them a little bit last week. I mean, the pressure's not going to be any less coming into this week. So I think even if Johnson does not have the greatest race, if he kind of struggles like we saw at Homestead last year, I still think he probably will at least back into the championship, because Kenseth just won't be able to run up front enough.
Yeah. And when you just talk about consistency, it's hard-pressed to find anybody more than Jimmy Johnson. And when you talk about momentum, obviously it's a momentum sport, because you have to look back to Tony Stewart a couple years ago. No one gave him a shot to win it, that he hit that momentum streak, and it's hard to match that. And Jimmy seems to have the momentum streak in more chases than not.
And you mentioned the last time Hendrick had a test at a racetrack, they did well. Also, we went to the Generation 6 car this year. The last time that NASCAR switched car models, went to the car of tomorrow in 2007. Jimmy Johnson won the championship and kind of dominated, and that's what he's done here in the chase as well.
Mr. Consistency and Discipline. Let's see, at one point in this chase, he was, about 72 points out, am I remembering correctly? He was pretty well back there. So definitely a statement, not just for Jimmy Johnson, but for all of Hendrick Motorsports. Mm-hmm. So, that said, with picking the championship, perhaps kind of a non-issue at this point, Terrence, who are you picking for the race?
Well, like I said, Hendrick Motorsports, they tested at Homestead. I'm expecting them to come out strong. And I think it's going to be Casey Kane getting his third win of the year. Maybe having a shot at his first pole, which I think is still surprising that Kane doesn't have a pole. This is the guy who's usually up front every week and wasn't able to get one this year. But what about you? Where are you going?
Well, this is kind of a tough one, because Homestead is always kind of an interesting race, because the championship is always in play, and the winner is always kind of secondary to who wins the championship. But Roush Fenway Racing has been strong at Homestead in the past. Greg Biffle's run well there. Matt Kenseth has run well back when he drove the Fords. So I think Carl Edwards is going to come in and get the win this year to finish off the season.
All right, so we've got you on record, both of you, Casey Kane and Carl Edwards. We'll see how that shapes up. One thing is for sure, no matter who wins the championship, it's NASCAR and their Sharpie fireworks. Stay tuned for a special in-studio guest when we come back.
Hi, and welcome back to Getting Our Kicks, brought to you by Budweiser. This week we've got a special guest, Mindy Morgan, Media Relations member with Texas Motor Speedway, and also Director of School Services at the Discovery Center here in Amarillo. We brought her on the show this week to talk about what she does at the racetrack. And so if you could just start by telling us a little bit about what your job entails at Texas.
Sure. I've worked for the Media Relations Department this is my 10th race, this last one. And so we take care of the media in the media center and help the drivers and their reps get what they need and get where they need, and just kind of make sure the weekend goes smoothly for them and everybody involved.
Yeah, we really appreciate it too.
What would you say is the key part in your weekend? Like, what is the one thing you have to make sure gets done right?
You know, the press conference schedule is probably the one thing that we have to stay on time with, because we do have media availability for everybody that comes in, and to keep them on schedule and get them where they need to be, we kind of take care of that, and anything that pops up along the weekend, because you never know what can come up in the course of a weekend.
And I do have to ask, how'd you get started?
I went to get my graduate degree in sports media communication, and I needed to do an internship, and Texas was where I wanted to be, so I just went down there, worked a race for them, and they offered me the internship the next semester, and I've been there ever since.
Have you always been a NASCAR fan, so it just kind of was a natural draw, or did you kind of learn the sport?
I kind of sort of stumbled into being a NASCAR fan. I had the TV on one weekend and was, fascinated from then on, more about the business side, because, like any other major sport, this one, has to pick up and move 36 weeks, out of the year, and that's amazing to me, that it can pick up and then drop into a new spot and do the same thing over again.
Now, from when you first started as an intern until now, do you remember what that first experience was like, and how it compares to whenever you go back down there now?
I think the first time I went, it was a little surreal, because that was my first experience in professional sports, and so trying to get into the flow of how fast-paced a race weekend is from the internal side of that was a little daunting. But, hopefully I caught on quick. I must have done well, because they've asked me back. So, and now it's more of a routine, and you know what to expect and when to expect it.
Now, one of the interesting things about a NASCAR weekend is the one event kind of lasts 3 or 4 days. What is your schedule like maybe on a Friday when there's practice and qualifying sessions compared to a race day?
Actually Friday is probably our busiest day, whether it's April or November of a race weekend, just because we have all the press conferences, we have, in this case in November, we have all 3 series on track on a Friday. So you've got practice, you've got qualifying, you've got post-race for the truck race, and so our day from the time we hit the ground first thing in the morning is pretty quick. Next thing you know, it's 10:30 at night, and you look up and the whole day's gone by.
Now, are you able to kind of learn with the sport and have a good grasp of what you're seeing out there on the track as well at this point?
Yeah, we don't get to watch a whole lot of the race. We're inside, looking at it on TV like everybody else is. But, you learn a lot about the intricacies of everything that goes into making those cars do what they do on a weekly basis, and how hard a job that really is for every member of the crew.
What would you say is kind of your most memorable moment, like going and doing that for 10 years? There's got to be one kind of moment that kind of sticks out to you.
I think it was the first time I went to Victory Lane. I have the job of passing out those black cowboy hats to the winners and the owners and crew, and that's a big deal to them. Texas is one of the few places that actually gives those hats and some type of award to crew, too. Mm-hmm. And so getting it to do that, and just how appreciative the crew members are to be able to be included in the Victory Lane ceremony is pretty neat. And
you said earlier you kind of had to guess at their hat sizes. Have you ever gotten one completely wrong before?
The more I do it, the better I get at it. I have to say, they pop out of the car to do their national media, and Dave Crome, who's the broadcast manager, and I are kind of sizing up, and we can generally hit it within a quarter. So it's not too bad. I'm getting better at it.
All right. Well, great. Thanks for coming on the show with us this week. And that'll do it for this week's edition of Green, White, Checkered. You can always send us an email at gwc@amarillo.com. That's gwc@amarillo.com. Thanks for watching, everybody.